Hi, welcome back and thanks for joining us here today. I'm Jamie and I am a blues disciple. Now please join us for a little while to hear some excellent blues music from some of the masters of the blues. Blues Disciples is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and please note that earphones or earbuds will definitely enhance your listening experience. We recommend that you listen to this program through our website at www.bluesdisciples.org so that you can click on the playlist to expand its size for easier viewing of the playlist and its many featured artists. Today, we're fortunate to present to you excerpts from a recent Skype interview we had with Miss Augusta Palmer, who wrote, co-produced, and directed a very good and different documentary film that centered around the early blues festivals from 1966 through 1969 held in the blues capital of Memphis, Tennessee. Not only did this documentary celebrate the genius of early acoustic blues artists and their music, this documentary also provides historical context to social issues that were on and below the surface then and now. Augusta's excellent film is titled The Blues Society and was first screened last year and still continues to enjoy successful viewings by audiences all around the country. Augusta Palmer is the daughter of Mary Branton and noted musicologist, writer, clarinetist, and producer Robert Palmer, each of whom worked and helped organize the early Memphis blues festivals that are featured in this film. We started our conversation with Augusta asking her to share how and why she created this excellent documentary film.
Sure. Well, I heard that there was this footage of the blues festivals that have been sitting in a basement for decades that was shot in 1969 by Gene Rosenthal and a crew that he led, and Gene Rosenthal of Adelphi Records. And so he had reached out to Nancy Jeffries, who was one of the main organizers, and said, I have this footage of the 69 Memphis Country Blues Festival that I never did anything with, and it would be really cool to do something with it at this point. And Nancy was the only person still alive among the core organizers. And she said, well, I think we should get a filmmaker involved, Gene, and I think it should be Augusta Palmer, because I had interviewed her for a film about my dad called The Hand of Fatima, about his relationship with Moroccan musicians. Yeah, so that's how I first heard about the footage, and Nancy and I went separately because it wasn't possible to synchronize the footage and the sound at that point. And one of the first things I heard was a recording of my mom giving a speech that now appears in the film where she begs people to pay for their tickets who had been gate crashers. And of course, I knew that my father was involved with these festivals, but my mother had never really mentioned her role in them to me. So that really caught my interest.
Sure. Oh, heck yeah. Did they collect much? Did they get some help?
No one seems to remember, and that is a question that people frequently have. However, when I was showing the film in Memphis, because we had a week-long theatrical run there in late May and early June, and a gentleman came up to me and said, I put $1.50 in that hat. So some people contributed, and I'm sure he wasn't alone.
All of the musical artists who performed at the 1969 Memphis Blues Festival are far too many to cover here. So we'll focus this show on 6 early and very influential blues legends who performed at these Memphis Blues Festivals. First, we'll hear from country acoustic blues legend Mr. Walter Furry Lewis, who was born in 1893 in Mississippi and passed away in 1981 at 88 years of age. As a child, Furry Lewis pieced together an old cigar box with a 2x4 guitar neck and screen door wire strings to fashion his own first guitar. A little later, Furry was given his first store-bought guitar by early composer and musician who is also known to many as the father of the blues, Mr. W.C. Handy. A few years later, Furry hit the road to work the tough house party and blues club circuit before 1910 and made his living there until 1916 when he lost a leg in a train accident and decided to move back to his hometown of Memphis. In 1922, he took a full-time job as a street sweeper for the city of Memphis. Fast forward to June 1962, when teenage musicologists, discoverers, and field recorders George Mitchell and his buddy Roger Dr. Down-Home Brown met Furry Lewis, whose guitar was in hock, and they loaned him their cheap Sears Roebuck guitar with one string missing to field record this great rendition of Furry's friend Sleepy John Estee's classic titled Brownsville Blues.
Take that right hand road, and I'm going to Brownsville. Lord, I ain't gonna start walking till I get my baby's door. And that woman I love, and she got great long curly hair. And that woman I love, and got great long curly hair. But her mother and father don't lie furry there. I'm gonna write me a letter, I'm gonna mail it in there. I'm gonna write me Lord, if a man stay here, can stay most everywhere. And my first name Furry, my second name ain't been told. Boy, my first name Furry, my second name ain't never been told. I've been waiting on you, baby, since you were 12 years old. Babe, you had no business treat me this way. And you had no business treat me this way. I'm going back to Georgia, going back there to stay.
On our podcast number 83, you'll hear George and Roger tell us about their meeting, partying with, and recording Furry Lewis, along with a great group of other early jug band blues artists. Folks, the historical festival film footage of the Blues Society was used earlier in a documentary titled Memphis 69. And I asked Augusta to tell us how the Blues Society film differed from Memphis 69 film.
Sure. I mean, Memphis 69, I think that and the Blues Society are really great kind of companion works because you get to see more music in Memphis 69. But Memphis 69 doesn't really talk about the context at all, or really, and doesn't get perspectives from people in the present moment. So, I mean, to me, history is always being written in the present. So as much as we want to just go in a time capsule and be back in the past, especially people who didn't live through that past, need more context to make sense out of it. And since many of the people involved in this festival, sadly, are no longer with us, you know, it seemed really important to be going and talking to those people when they were still around. In some cases, I was also lucky to get footage of Jim Dickinson, for example, a great producer that was shot before his death by the daughter-in-law of Sid Selvage, as it happens. It's a small world. Who's a really good filmmaker, so she was able to share that with me, as well as interviews that she had done with Sid Selvage, who was another person who played at the festivals and was a great blues-inspired white artist. So I just think that was part of my concept for the film. I mean, from the beginning and to the end, that I wanted to reevaluate what this moment of the blues revival means now, because I think the majority of works out there about it are are maybe a little bit overly romantic from my point of view and often don't have very many Black voices speaking in them. So I wanted to make sure that I foregrounded and centered Black voices. So you get to hear archival recordings with oral histories with Furry Lewis and Robert Wilkins and many of the players, Booker T. Washington or Booker White, and you get to hear them talking about their own lives, which is very important to me. But you also get to hear from musicians like Dom Flemons and sociologist Zandria Robinson, who says some important things about Black-white collaboration and how that's always fraught, and great writer Jamie Hatley, who wrote a beautiful piece about hating the blues in the Oxford American many years ago, and sort of expresses her arc of hating the blues as a younger person and coming to love it as a Black woman. And so I think that those perspectives are very important, as is the perspective of Henry Nelson, a Black guy from West Memphis who became a Memphis radio legend much later on, but came to the blues festivals at age 15, hoping to get a ride to Woodstock. And I guess that became his stock.
Now we'll play two other songs by Furry Lewis, which were recorded July 21st, 1968 in Memphis by British music producer Mike Vernon, and were each performed a year later at the Memphis Blues Festival as shown in the film. The first song is the traditional classic Let Me Call You Sweetheart. The second song is the Blind Lemon Jefferson classic See That My Grave Is Kept Clean.
Call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep your love light gleaming in your eyes so blue. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love. Met together, we was never to part. I got so differently, you seem to want to part. When I cried, have mercy, and I cried in vain. Now, my darling, I hate to hear your name, but won't you let me call you sweetheart, I'm in. Won't you let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep your love light gleaming in your eyes so blue. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. This song here now has been dedicated to see my grave kept clean. Oh, one kind favor I ask of you. One kind favor I ask of you. Just one kind favor I ask of you. Just see if my grave kept clean. My heart stopped beating, my hand got cold. Heart stopped beating, my hand got cold. My heart stopped beating and my hand got cold. It won't long for then the shade grow. Oh, two white horses in a line. Two white horses in a line. There is two white horses in a line. They're gonna take me to my burying ground. Have you ever heard your coffin sound? Ever heard your coffin sound? Ever heard your, oh, you know, further than ground. Have you ever heard your coffin sound? You can dig my grave with a silver spade. Dig my grave with a silver spade. Dig my grave with a silver spade. You can let me down with a golden chain. Oh, every length in my Jesus' name. Every link in my Jesus' name. Every link in my Jesus' name. Every link in my Jesus' name. One kind favor I ask of you. One kind favor I ask of you. Just one kind favor I ask you. Just see, is my grave kept clean?
Augusta then shares a story told to her in the documentary from local white blues artist Kenny Brown, who grew up in Nesbit, Mississippi, deep in the heart of the Mississippi Hill Country, about his meeting the semi-retired early blues legend Mississippi Joe Callicutt when Kenny was only 12 years old in 1966.
I thought that Kenny's story is so interesting, not just because he's Kenny and he's such a great musician and so moved and touched by his encounter with Joe Callicutt, but also it's really interesting that he might have never met or gotten involved with Joe Callicutt, who was his neighbor, but he didn't know anything about him except that some guys had come down in a Mercedes with New York plates, probably this group including my dad. And they were asking around for this guy, Joe Callicutt, and Kenny Brown said, that sounded like a made-up name to me, and those guys had long hair, and I was pretty suspicious. But then he started, because of that, he got interested in Joe and started hearing his music and kind of apprenticed himself to Joe in the, sadly, very short time that Joe Callicutt had left after that. So, yeah, it's interesting. There was someone who said in the film in an earlier cut, and it's one of the, you always miss a few things that you cut out ultimately in a film, but someone said, someone who's from Memphis, a writer and filmmaker, Brian Ginley, had said they might have been carpetbaggers, but they taught us a lot about what was right in front of us and made us aware of that, paraphrasing him. And that was I think that's an important idea, that this group of people who put on these blues festivals in Memphis, they came from all over the country, some from right from Memphis, some from, like my dad, from Little Rock, Arkansas, very close by. But then also there were a lot of people from Maryland, like John Fahey, who doesn't really play a large role in the film, but did play a role in the festivals, and people from New York, like Bill Barth and Nancy Jeffries. So it really brought together a lot of people from different places, their love of blues music and of these musicians were very, very charismatic figures. Yeah. And then that in turn inspired people like Kenny Brown, who was a little bit younger than they were, to get really into and start playing the music and make a life out of playing the music.
Early blues legend Mississippi Joe Callicutt was born in 1899 in Mississippi and passed away in 1969. In August 1967, our friend, musicologist, and producer George Mitchell and his wife Kathy found, befriended, and recorded Mississippi Joe Callicutt at his home in Nesbit, Mississippi. Mr. Callicutt had his music recorded only once before, back in 1929, on a record with his early playing partner, Mr. Garfield Akers. Joe Callicutt continued to team and performed with Mr. Akers for the next 30 years in and around North Mississippi until Akers' death in 1959. At that point, Joe Callicutt put down his guitar and pretty much ceased performing until George and Kathy found him and field recorded him in August 1967, about 21 months before Mr. Callicutt's death in May 1969, which was just a month before the 1969 Memphis Blues Festival. Now here is Mississippi Joe Callicutt's 1967 field recording, Laughing to Keep From Crying.
Well, you don't know my fetched mind, baby. You don't know my. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on. Says a woman, says I'm loving, she the height of me. Put my heart in trouble, ignorant misery. You don't know my mind. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on crying. Well, don't you mistreat me, 'cause I'm young and wise. Must remember you've been once a child. You don't know my. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on. Well, I woke up this morning and it looked like rain. Round the corner was the passenger train. Well, you don't know, sure don't know, Mom. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on. You can spend my money, you can't wear my clothes. Mistreat me just like a man you've seen before. Say that you don't know. Oh, you see me laughing to keep on. And you don't know my fetched mind. You don't know my. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on. She your little woman, I'm a learner for myself. Don't want to sit with nobody else. Well, you don't know. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on. You don't know my mind, sweet baby. You don't know my. Oh, when you see me laughing, I'm laughing to keep on crying. Real high yellow sun, gray, black, and brown. A yellow woman said, won't leave town. Says you don't know my. And you see me laughing to keep on crying.
On our podcast number 86, we heard how George and Kathy Mitchell found, befriended, and recorded Mississippi Joe Callicut. Now we'll hear one more song from Mississippi Joe Callicut from his performance at the 1968 Memphis Blues Festival. This song is a Bukka White classic titled Great Long Ways from Home.
Everybody listen. I've been around a great long time. Well, I've been around a great long time. Well, I wanna know, baby, can you change my mind? Well, I'm way down, long ways from home. Poor boy, I'm a poor boy, long ways from home. I ain't got nobody, got my good way gone. I'm a-going to the racetrack, see my pony run. Yeah, you gonna go. I'm going to the racetrack, see my pony. I'll win some money, I'm gonna save you some. Told me that you love me free. And you told me that you love me. Well, a woman want you to think of me. While I went down the country, said I didn't try to stay one while. How you gonna go? While I went down the country, won't stay left. Well, you mistreat me just like I'm a child. I moan all day long, baby, I moan all day long. Oh boy, we're long ways from home. What the good is your food if you say won't run? What good is your food, you so it won't run? What you need with a woman, call her and she won't come. Well, I had my baby, it's all night long. I hug my baby, it was all night long. Trying to teach this woman, teach her right from wrong. Anything you do, they won't do right. Lord, Lord, anything you do, they won't do right. Trying to keep that devil man, keep it out of your sight. Don't write me no letter, send me 2-3 lines. One time, baby. Don't write me no letter, send me 2-3 lines. Well, send me something, ease my trouble in mind. Going away, I ain't gonna stay. Well, I'm going. Look out! Well, I love my woman, hate her dirty way. Well, the way that you got called a good man in this grave. Well, look out! Well, I believe that my soul is gonna last you all these days. You can tell when your baby gonna treat you mean. You can always tell when woman gonna treat you mean. Get your meals on regular and your house ain't never clean. You can always tell the girl don't want you around. Don't go on. You can always tell when your girl don't want you around. Got a rag on the head, head turned upside down. Be with me, tagging where you wanna go, baby. Be tagging where you wanna go. Don't you mistreat me, don't drive me from your door.
Look out, we're getting better. Said, fella, you gonna fuck up now.
What that is?
That's correct. That's correct.
Next, Augusta and I spoke about the integrity of early blues music and the enormous perseverance and genius of so many of the early blues artists, and the fact that so little attention is given to these artists who created such a large part of all of the music we hear every day of our lives. And I asked Augusta how she feels about this and what might help bring a larger audience to the blues.
I have been able to show the film to some groups of high school students, and as the parent of two teenagers, I was terrified by that. But luckily, the high school students I've shown it to were well. I actually my kids have been interested in the film too. But anyway, the high school students that I got to show it to were more interested and really open to it. I think one of the things that maybe is helpful in turning that around is presenting blues music in a slightly different way, because I think that a lot of the sort of presentation of blues by white fans who are very well intentioned, who are part of the blues revival, you know, a lot of people tended to present it in a kind of museum type of way. And in this way that was like, it's a folk tradition. But, you know, even though he didn't have a huge following at the time, Robert Johnson was a recording artist. He had a record contract. He was like a cool guy. So I think trying to get back and see that part of it for young people, is a lot of these artists were stars, you know, in the moment of the 20s and the 30s, and really happening of the moment stars. So trying to get people to see that, I think, sometimes can be helpful. You know, I think nobody should be told they can't play or listen to a certain set of music because of their race or their gender or any other reason, right? And by the same token, I don't think people should be told you have to be or you ought to be interested in this music because of those same factors. But I do think, like I said, I mean, maybe separating it out from the white rock and rollers that were such big fans and try to popularize, you know, the people they idolize, maybe was a turnoff to some people and still is. So reframing it and thinking about these people as recording artists. And also, it happens that the artists who were featured in the Memphis Country Blues festivals, the blues artists didn't include any women, but there were so many great blues women. So I think that's also something that people need to pay attention to and will help a bigger audience get interested in blues music. And a lot of that stuff is still, even today, a little spicy, Memphis Minnie and so forth. So that helps when people hear that, I think.
Now we'll hear from early blues legend Mr. Booker T. Washington Bukka White, who was born in Mississippi in 1906 and passed away in 1977. Mr. White was named after the African-American educator and activist Mr. Booker T. Washington. Booker started his career playing fiddle, but soon moved to guitar and usually played a National Resonator guitar with a slide. In the early 1960s, Bukka White became a key part of the folk blues revival. Here are two recordings made by Bukka White at the July 20th, 1968 Memphis Blues Festival. The first is one of his classics, Hello Central, Give Me 49. And the second song is Baby Please Don't Go.
Next, you're going to hear from Mr. Booker White and my own self.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, it shouldn't be what you don't know. I live here, and I was listening the other evening when it was on the air. The guy asked him, he said, we didn't know we had nobody here like that. And I've been around here ever since 39, playing in. This is my headquarters, which I stay here. I live on Mosby. But I wanted to get the feel of here, for us to have some fun here, because I get tired riding train and bus and airplane. Last October, I was way overseas. They said, do you play around Memphis much? I couldn't say, I said occasionally. I wouldn't say I didn't play, I said occasionally. That's what I told them, though. So the our first selection would be, Hello Central, Give Me 49. Hello Central, would you please, ma'am, give me 49? Hello Central, would you please, ma'am, give me 49? I got a little woman, she done left me. Boy, and out of cloud, that little woman, she can't be found. My baby, she left me. Left out and children crying. I didn't mind that woman going, but I just hate to see you leave me with 5 children crying. I said, if you find that woman, would you please, ma'am, telephone 309? Tell that woman would she mind coming home. I done got tired of hearing me 5 children crying. Yeah. She drank Morgan Davis wine. I know she's somewhere lying on the ground. The poor girl making mistakes, you don't know what you're doing. She done got drunk and laid on the ground. But I want somebody to please help me. Please help me to find that little girl of mine. I can't mistreat these little children. She got 5 little children standing in the back and crying. Police, he got on a search. He looked in town all around. He come back, he said, Book, I can't find that woman. I said, if you don't find her, I'm gonna jump off a boat and drown. I done got sick and tired. I done got sick and tired. The little children screaming and crying. Well, she left the little 5 children. And she didn't leave one of them out to die. Wait up. When the police find my baby, she was lying dead on the ground. She had drank some more Morgan Davis wine till she almost lose her mind. I said, baby, come on home. Please come on home. Stop your little screaming and crying. She said, you know, I'm drinking my Morgan Davis wine. And you know when I get you drinking, I'm fine. Yeah. Cool it now. My baby, when she fell up in the door, she threw her arms around her baby child. She said, now why y'all keep on crying in? Cause I've been out all night long. I said, baby, I've been calling all over town. I knew you were drinking your Morgan Davis wine. When they find my baby, when they find her, and she was lying on the ground. Get her back in there and talk to her.
Now the next selection would be Baby Please Don't Go. How many times I have begged them that, but they go anyway.
Please check out our extensive interviews with Dr. David Evans regarding his friend Booker White, as Dr. Evans speaks extensively about Booker White's life as he introduces much of Booker White's great music on our podcast numbers 216, 217, 226, and 227. Now we have a couple of songs from early blues and later gospel legend, Mr. Robert Wilkins, who was born in Mississippi in 1896 and passed away in 1987. Mr. Wilkins was first recorded in 1928 and performed with and around other early blues legends such as Furry Lewis, Frank Stokes, Memphis Minnie, and Mississippi Joe Callicott. Then, as a result of a violent fight during a house party where Robert Wilkins was performing in 1935, he underwent a religious conversion, renounced blues music, stopped recording, and became a preacher, only performing gospel music thereafter. Reverend Robert Wilkins did resume recording in the mid-1960s with encouragement from noted musicologist Dick Spotswood. Here now are two of the songs that Reverend Wilkins recorded at the July 20th, 1968 Memphis Blues Festival. Reverend Wilkins was accompanied by his family band. The first song is Reverend Robert Wilkins' In Heaven, Sitting Down, and the second is What Do You Think About Jesus?
I wished I was in heaven sitting down. Lord, I wished I was in heaven sitting down. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I wish I was in heaven. Lord, I wish I was in heaven sitting down. Lord, I wish I was in heaven sitting down. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I wish I was in heaven. Lord, take away sin and give me grace. Lord, take away sin and give me grace. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, take away sin and give me. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I wish out in heaven. Lord, I ain't gonna do like I done before. Lord, I ain't gonna do like I done before. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I ain't gonna do like I done before. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I wish out in heaven. Play it for us. Lord, I ain't gonna do like I done before. Lord, I ain't gonna do like I done before. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I ain't gonna do like I done. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I wish out in heaven. Lord, I ain't gonna tell no lie no more. Lord, I ain't gonna tell no lie no more. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I ain't gonna tell no lie no more. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Lord, I wish out in heaven sitting down. Oh, angel, oh my Lord, Lord, I wish out in heaven. Play it again. What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about Jesus? Yes, he died on Calvary. 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 What do you think about Jesus? 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 Yes, he died for you and me. 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 What do you think about Jesus? 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 Oh, they whooped him all night long. Oh, they whooped him all night long. Yeah, they whooped him all night long. Yeah, they been with him all night long. What do you think about Jesus? 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 He never said a mumbling word. 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 What do you think about Jesus? 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 He will save your soul. 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 What do you think about Jesus? 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 He's all right, all right. 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 What do you think about Jesus? 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 Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then, as Augusta and I wound down our conversation, I appreciate, your time and certainly appreciate the phenomenal work you did on this film. I think it is different than most of the other, it's different from anything else that I've seen in that I think you bring that context to it in a more meaningful, real way. And I guess many people look at Deep Blues as a quintessential great documentary and everything, but I think you outshine that one easily.
Well, those are kind words, and I really think Robert Muggy, who made Deep Blues, is really talented. And of course, my dad is the narrator in that. Yeah, I mean, I think that the other thing that I've been telling to students when I show the film is that my film it's a choose your own adventure history film. So it presents sometimes people saying the opposite things, and then you as the viewer have to decide who you believe and why. And I think so many documentaries sort of have like an authoritative voice who tells you what to think and what to believe. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I also like being able to make something that provokes questions rather than provides answers. So you gotta find the answers yourself. But along the way, you can listen to some beautiful music in my film. So yeah,
without a doubt. So to close out our show, one other amazing blues artist to perform at the early Memphis Blues Festivals was guitar master Mississippi Fred McDowell, who was joined by blues harpist Mr. Johnny Woods. Mississippi Fred McDowell was actually born in Tennessee in 1906 and passed away in 1972. When he moved to Mississippi in his early 20s, he picked up the hill country blues style and became one of the first widely known hill country blues artists. Fred McDowell's extraordinary blues harp playing partner in the 1950s, Johnny Woods, was born in 1917 and passed away in 1990. Blues historian, discoverer, and producer George Mitchell and his wife Kathy went to the hill country of Mississippi in the late summer of 1967 armed with their portable tape recorder and a list of potential blues contacts provided by our friend and ethnomusicologist Dr. David Evans to explore and hopefully record some blues artists from that part of Mississippi during a very short 13-day period. On our podcast number 88, George told us how he and Kathy met Fred McDowell, and together the three tracked down harmonica ace and recorded some remarkable country blues music. Fred and Johnny were both shown in Augusta's great documentary, but I don't think Johnny's performances with Fred were published. So we'll hear two songs field recorded by George Mitchell at a hill country house party on a hot and sticky evening in August 1967. The first song we'll hear by the duo is the traditional I Walked All Night Long, with Fred McDowell's vocals and guitar and Johnny Woods with his harmonica. Then we'll hear Ray Charles and Renald Richards' 1954 composition, I Got a Woman, with Johnny Woods' vocals and harmonica and Fred McDowell's guitar. These songs were both published from the first take, without any rehearsal, and with these two gentlemen playing together for the first time in over 8 years. Now please pull your chair up closer and give a listen, and thank you all for joining us.
I hear you. That's right. Oh, I hear somebody calling. I hear somebody calling too. Lord, be who there. Oh, I've walked all night. Lord, my feet got soaking wet. I have been there too. You know I walked all night long, darling. My feet got soaking. Lord, I was with my baby. I swear, Lord, she ain't come yet. You know my big guy like a nigga. She watching me all. You know my big guy like a nigga. That's why she watch me all the time. She watch me early in the morning. I swear, Lord, she watch me late at night. I said I done talk with her, babe. Honey, don't you know it ain't right. Oh, sun rose this morning. I was laying down on my floor. I got a woman way over down. She's good to me. Oh, yeah. I got a woman way across town. She's good to me. Oh, yeah. She gave me money. She called me honey. Oh, I'm a loving child. I got a woman way across town. She's good to me. Let's go. She gives me money when I'm needing shade. She calls me honey, she gives me money, I need a shade. Whoa, yeah. Now don't worry, baby boy, I can think about you on every yard. I got a woman with growth down. Let's go, Shay. With my baby, she for me, whoa, yeah. She left me a fortune, she gave me money, whoa, I'm a loving man. I got one where it goes down.